As we think about our experience with God, as we think about those moments where we want God to step in, we want God to make a change, we want Him to bring a new word, we find ourselves often looking for something that is grandiose. We look for something that is of, biblical proportion. Sometimes we want the lightning bolt. We want that sudden, bold, dramatic, something like we want the burning bushes. We want the parting seas. We want breakthrough prayers, and we want miracle moments. But more often than not, God doesn't show up like lightning. He doesn't crack that bolt across the sky and then suddenly we recognize it. He moves like the sunrise. Slow, steady, almost imperceptible, until suddenly the whole sky is lit. And we don't realize it at the time. But afterward, after looking back, we say things like, I didn't see it in the moment, but God was opening that door the whole time. We see it in things like, you know what? If that disappointment hadn't have come my way, I would have never met her. And the layoff, it brought me back to my purpose. The kindness of a stranger. Man, it changed everything. And so what do? Often many people call those things like coincidence. Like it was a happy accident, a circumstance. Do you know what the scripture calls that? It calls it providence. And providence is God's invisible hand guiding visible lives toward redemption. As we will find in Ruth Chapter 2, this is a story that is soaked in providence. Just a little recap. Okay, we have Naomi and Ruth. Naomi's the mother-in-law to Ruth. And both of them experienced some great loss while they're out. Ruth, in particular, she has lost everything. She's lost her husband. She's lost her home. She's lost any semblance of security. She is now in a foreign land. And on top of that, she's there with her mother-in-law. She has no money. She has no job. She has no prospects. So let yourself sit in that moment. What would you do? Let's see what Ruth does. You know what Ruth does? She wakes up and she goes to work. She wakes up, she goes to work. She doesn't have a promise that everything's going to be okay. She doesn't have an angelic vision that is hovering above saying, this is the way, this is what you should do, this is how it will go. Don't worry, the Lord is with you. There's no burning bush. But what does she have? Just the field that she saw when she walked into town. Faithfulness, it doesn't always feel that spiritual. Because faithfulness is sometimes just simply showing up when you're tired. Faithfulness is sometimes just being consistent and trusting God with everything else. God, I don't think there's anything else I can do except for get up and go to work. I don't think there's anything else I can do except for get up and make one more step forward. What does it look like to have faithfulness in the ordinary? That's what we're wrestling with here in Ruth is what does it look like to have faithfulness in the humdrum, in those moments where it's just like, eh. What is it like to have faithfulness in the grind when truly you're being ground down? You know, Ruth chapter 2, it opens quietly. There's no miracles, there's no lightning, there's no divine voice from heaven. It's just a woman waking up in the morning, tying her hair back, and heading off to work. Ruth chapter 2, starting in verse 2. One day, Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go out into the harvest fields to pick up the stalks of grain left behind by anyone who is kind enough to let me do it." You know, I don't know exactly the conversation that Naomi and Ruth were having, and it's likely that we can miss the magnitude of this verse, but here these two women are in great need. They have no one that is providing for them. They find themselves without any prospects. And Ruth, she doesn't know what's coming. All she knows is there's a field and I can work. There's a field and I can work. And so Naomi replied, "All right, my daughter, go ahead." I mean, at least it's something, right? So Ruth went to gather grain beside the harvesters. Now, she doesn't know whose field it is. She doesn't even know who Boaz is. She doesn't know that in a moment this story is going to completely change. And her story is part of the story that changes the world. All she knows is that she has an option to stay in bed or get up. She is determined. She's courageous. She's determined that she will care for her mother-in-law. I mean, she's a widow. And now she's a foreigner in a strange land, a foreigner in a patriarchal society. But Ruth begins to move forward in quiet obedience. She has absolutely no guarantees that it's going to work out, no guarantee she's going to pick up enough for one day, much less two. There's no spotlight. It's just faith in motion. You know, sometimes the most God-honoring thing you can do is simply show up. For students, you know, that means that it might mean showing up to church or to youth group when it feels like no one else cares about their faith. For young adults, it's going to work on Monday, still believing that integrity matters in a world that just looks for shortcuts. For parents, maybe it's one more bedtime prayer, one more conversation about kindness, one more conversation about telling the truth, one more conversation even when you are exhausted. For retirees, it's the courage to believe that God's not done using you yet. Even if the phone doesn't ring as much anymore. Sometimes faithfulness is simply showing up in the same field, doing what you can do with what you have. Showing up in the same field, doing what you can do with what you have. Doing it day after day after day. Doing what you can with what you have, trusting that your efforts are not wasted. God's not wasting your efforts. You know why? Because God, He's always at work. moving in to the next part of that verse in chapter 2. He says, As it happened, Ruth, she found herself working in a field that belonged to Boaz, the relative of her father-in-law, Elimelech. Now this as it happens, I believe, is kind of a wink from the author, because this is not by happenstance, this is how it went about. Oh, it was a lucky accident. No, it's a wink. It's showing that there is a providence that is happening. This is providence. This is God's action. That God is there in the timing, that God is there in the location. God is there in the direction of her steps. While Ruth was being faithful in the ordinary, God was orchestrating something extraordinary. She did not know that she was walking into the field of her future. She just thought she was collecting a little bit of grain so they could make some food later. She didn't know she was walking into the field of her future, but God did. And maybe He's doing the same with you. You might be in a field right now that feels absolutely unremarkable. It's the same old field that I've been in for years. It doesn't seem like it's going anywhere. I mean, yeah, I'm working hard. I'm loving people. I'm serving quietly. But there's something that is nagging me. And I'm starting to wonder, does it even matter? You know, providence, it often wears the disguise of the routine, of the everyday, of the just one step in front of the other. You know, you don't have to see God working to know that He is. You don't have to see that God is working to know that He's actually at work. God often does His greatest work through the people who are faithful in the ordinary. And that's what Ruth teaches us. It teaches us that God is always at work. Ruth doesn't just happen to show up in Boaz's field. It's not a coincidence. She encounters a man who lives his faith through kindness. And so Boaz, he steps into the story. He steps in there like sunlight after a long storm. He doesn't come in with fanfare and loudness. He's not flashy. He's just a steady guy walking in. He's gracious. He's attentive. Verse 4. While she was there in the fields, Boaz arrived in Bethlehem, and he greeted the harvesters. "The Lord be with you," he said. "The Lord bless you," the harvesters replied. Now, this simple greeting from Boaz, it tells you everything that you need to know about his character. Boaz carries the presence of God into his work. "The Lord be with you," he says to those who are working his fields. And they reply with joyfulness, "The Lord bless you." The people under his care, they flourish because he leads with blessing, not with burden. You know, Ruth notices. Everyone else notices. And Boaz treats her with dignity. You know, the culture that she lived in saw her as disposable, especially being a foreign woman. But he offers her protection. He offers her protection when others would have taken advantage. He shows her kindness. Hesed. The Hebrew word there is hesed. This hesed is covenant kindness. It's deep, covenant-based relationship. It conveys this act of mercy, this this kindness, and it comes through a commitment to faithful devotion and loyalty. Hesed is this covenant kindness of God. It's the same loyal love that God shows to his people. And Boaz is now extending this out to Ruth. This kindness is covenantal. It's intentional. It's consistent. And it's redemptive. Boaz's kindness, it wasn't just in words. It was in structure. In fact, he told his men, verse 15, let her gather grain. Just let her gather grain right up to the sheaves, not just the corners of this field, but let her walk up behind you with you putting the sheaves out without stopping her. Do not rebuke her. In fact, why don't you go ahead and pull some heads of barley from the bundles and drop them on purpose for her. Let her pick them up. And don't give her a hard time. Boaz created this system of kindness for Ruth. He built grace into the system. And this is not a one-time thing. He made sure that she could keep gleaning safely every single day. He's showing her hesed, covenant kindness, the kind that protects, the kind that provides, the kind of kindness that says, because God has been faithful to me, I will be faithful to you. Because God has been faithful to me, I will be faithful to you. Now, what does that look like? Looks like in school. When you see someone that's on the outside, that you include the one who doesn't fit. That's kindness. What does it look like at work? It looks like choosing generosity over competition in a culture that celebrates self-promotion. What does hesed kindness look like in a family? It means modeling grace. Not only grace inside your home, but grace for others, because the world is teaching you to be cynical. Now, you may not own a field, but God has entrusted you with influence. You're like, I don't have influence. You have influence in your home. You have influence in your school. You have influence on your team. You have influence in your neighborhood. You have influence in everywhere that you step. Somewhere in that space, in your home, in your school, on your team, in your neighborhood, somewhere in that space, there is someone who needs a Boaz moment. There's someone that needs someone to step in and give them a word of blessing, an act of protection, an invitation of belonging. And when you show that kind of kindness, you begin to mirror the covenant heart of God. Kindness reminds others of their worth. Now let's rewind just a little bit in the conversation with Boaz. As Boaz stepped onto his field and he kind of surveyed what was going on, he noticed this young lady. And Boaz asked his foreman, who is that young woman who is that young woman over there? Who does she belong to? Hey, I noticed that lady over here. Now tell me, whose house does she belong to? And Ruth's story begins to pivot in this chapter. And it's not because of luck. It's not because it just happened to happen. The pivot begins because of character. Because the character that's been exhibited. Boaz notices something in Ruth that the rest of the world may have overlooked. So he says, who's that woman over there? Who does she belong to? And the foreman replied, She is the young woman from Moab who came back with Naomi. And she asked this morning if she could gather grain behind the harvesters. I want to tell you, not only did she ask for permission, she's been hard at work ever since. She's not stopped, except for a few minutes to rest in the shelter. She came out and she has kept pace with us. Before Boaz even speaks to Ruth, her reputation speaks for her. He sees in her the fruit of humility. She sees that she's a person walking with integrity and that she is a person that has perseverance. She's kept in step and didn't stop. She didn't go, "Oh, could you pick up that for me? Oh, could you fill my basket?" There was no feigning that she was weak, because she wasn't. She's a young woman of integrity, of character, of perseverance. And Ruth, she wasn't angling for attention. She wasn't counting on some sort of glance that was going to change her life. She wasn't networking with people. So who do I need to know to get the most that I can get without really having to do anything? She wasn't networking for favor. She was simply being faithful. And faithfulness, it's magnetic. People notice faithfulness. And our Father in heaven honors it. So often, we want favor first, and then we'll be faithful. You're like, "Nah, that's not me. That's not me." Have you ever said, "God, if you would give me money, I promise I would be faithful to you with it. God, if you give me that job, I promise that I won't make it my idol. God, if you give me that girl, I promise I will be faithful to you with her." So often, we want God to give us the blessing first, with a promise from a promise breaker that we will be faithful. In God's kingdom, it works the other way around. Faithfulness opens the door to favor. Boaz tells Ruth in verse 11, sits down, chats with her a little bit. They're talking a little bit about what's going on around the field and who she is and all these kinds of things. And he says, "Listen, I know about everything that you've done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband." He says, "Listen, I've been watching and I've heard how you left your family, you left your father and your mother and your own land for the sake of your mother-in-law, and you came here to live among complete strangers. You left everything that you knew, and you stuck with her." And Boaz sees the story behind the woman. He recognizes that she has sacrificed, that she is loyal, and that she has courage. And he blesses her for it. He says, "I've seen and I've heard, and may the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge, and he rewards you fully for what you've done." Based on your faithfulness to your mother-in-law, based on your courage to step away from everything that you knew, may the Lord, my God, the one of Israel, may he put you under the shadow of his wings. May he give you this moment of refuge, and may he reward you fully for your sacrifice. Boaz commends her. He commends the work that she's doing, and he connects her worth to her faith in God. And that's what sets Ruth apart. Character is shaped by trust, not by circumstance. Character is built in the shadows long before favor shines in the spotlight. So if you're just trying to stay honest when everyone is cheating, God sees that. You know, for those that are just in that moment where they're working 2 jobs and they're still showing up to serve, God notices that. For the parent who keeps choosing grace instead of resentment, God's proud of that. For the grandparent who prays for family when no one else even knows it. For the grandparent that is praying day after day for their children and grandchildren. I want you to know that God hears every word. And like Ruth, your consistency, it is not wasted. God's favor is not random. It often rests on those who live with quiet faithfulness. Boaz's response shows us a truth that we need to remember. You can't manipulate favor, but you can cultivate the kind of life that God blesses. You can't set up some sort of scheme where God will bless you. You're not going to manipulate and trick God into giving you good things. But you can cultivate the kind of life that God loves to bless. You can cultivate a life that brings the fruit of the harvest. And if Ruth Chapter 2 teaches us anything, it's that character attracts what charisma never could. You know, the world, it celebrates visibility, but God, He celebrates integrity. Ruth did not perform her way into blessing. She lived her way into it. And that principle holds true for us. You know, here's how it goes. It's like that string of what seems like ordinary events. That day after day faithfulness, that one step in front of the other, that moment of continuing to do the right thing even when it was hard, to have integrity instead of shortcuts. Those ordinary events become a woven tapestry of divine activity. This chapter opens with Ruth going to glean. She's going to glean because she's hungry. She's going out to glean and she's vulnerable. She could be taken advantage of. She goes out and she doesn't know what to expect. She doesn't know if she'll have enough even for one day. But it closes. This day begins that way, but it closes with her returning home with arms full of grain and a heart that is full of hope. You know, when you walk in godly character, you don't have to chase opportunity. Opportunity will find you. So, Ruth returns back to Naomi. She walks in the door and Naomi looks at Ruth and she goes, well, that's interesting. Where did you go to gather this grain today? Naomi asked, going, oh my goodness, that's a lot of grain. Where did you work? May the Lord bless the one who helped you. It was astounding to see what she had brought in. So Ruth told her mother-in-law about the man in whose field that she had worked. The man that I worked with today is named Boaz. And Naomi's face, it lights up. And that bitterness, that Mara, that bitterness that wants to find her, shows signs that it's beginning to break. Because when Ruth says Boaz, Naomi, she hears hope. The man I worked with today is named Boaz. May the Lord bless him, Naomi exclaims. She told her daughter, may the Lord bless him because he is showing kindness to us and as well as your dead husband. To which Ruth goes, tell me more. She says, that man is one of our closest relatives, one of our family redeemers. That man is our kinsman redeemer. In a single day, everything in their world begins to shift. And it's not because Ruth orchestrated it. All she knew is that she could get up, pull back her hair, and go work hard. And it's not because Naomi demanded it. She didn't go into the town or into her family and say, okay, what kind of person can I set my daughter-in-law up with? God was weaving redemption into what was routine. And this is where the theme of restored comes from. Of restored, it comes into full view in this moment. And God never performed a miracle in the book of Ruth. There were no seas to part. There was no manna falling from heaven. There were no prophets calling down fire, but God's fingerprints were everywhere. His fingerprints were in the timing of Ruth's steps. In Boaz's arrival at just the right moment, in the favor that opens unexpected doors, in the grain that fills Naomi's empty hands. What looks like coincidence is actually coordination. What feels random is really redemptive. And the same is true for you. You may not see it yet, but God is already at work. He's already at work in the details of your field. Maybe you're in a season where nothing feels supernatural. Nothing feels like God is in it. It doesn't feel like there's this big presence of God. And you're doing your best. You're doing your best to try and follow Jesus, but it feels truly just like survival. And if that's you, then Ruth's story is for you. It's for the young mom who keeps showing up for bedtime prayers when no one notices. God uses that. For the man who chooses integrity over profit, God sees that. For the teenager holding on to faith in a cynical world, God honors that. For the couple who keeps forgiving when it would be easier to quit, God's blessing that. Faithfulness may not make the headlines, but faithfulness moves heaven. Ruth didn't see the end of the story. She didn't open up the book for that day. Okay, here's what's happening today. I just want to see. Okay, it's going to be okay. All right. She didn't know the end of the story, but she trusted the author. I don't know how many of you are like this. If you get into a book, if you read, okay? You open a book and it gets a little tense. And you're like, gosh, I hope this thing works out. And then you're like, Hey, I know how I can know if it turns out okay. Anyone in here read the last page before you finish a book? Got a couple of you. Some are saying blasphemy. But even when you don't know the end of the story, you can trust the one that writes the story. And God took Ruth's small steps of obedience and turned them into a legacy that would one day lead to King David. And that legacy would one day lead to Jesus. And by the time that Ruth returns home, by the time she goes from the field to her home, she's carrying more than grain. She's carrying evidence that God is at work. Naomi, who once said, "Call me Mara," don't call me pleasant, but call me bitter, she begins to believe again. The famine is over, and hope is rising. And it turns out that God was there all along. That God was there through the famine, that God was there through the field, through the faithfulness, that God had always been there. And he's still there now. You know, when you walk faithfully, God works providentially, even when you don't see it yet. Ruth's story in chapter 2 ends with the hands full of grain. But what she's really holding is evidence of grace. She couldn't see the whole picture. She couldn't see the whole picture when she left her house that morning. She just knew that she could be faithful with what she had and what was in front of her. And by nightfall, she had more than enough. Naomi, who came back from the foreign land, she came back empty. She came back with less than she had ever left with. She begins to have hope again. She looks at the grain and she sees that God has not forgotten them. He was working all along, quietly, steadily, providentially. And that's the message for every person in the room. You don't have to understand God's plan to trust his hand. Maybe you're standing in a field of uncertainty right now. Maybe you just don't know, you're not sure what's going on. You don't know if what you're doing even matters. You're wondering if your obedience is ever going to pay off. You're tired. You're tired of showing up and not seeing results. Ruth's story whispers the truth that you need to hear. Keep walking. Keep doing the next right thing. Keep sowing faithfulness into ordinary days. Because the same God who directed Ruth's steps is still writing stories today, and maybe your story may be next. So what's the invitation? Whatever field you're in, school, work, home, marriage, retirement, work it faithfully. Work your field with faithfulness. And don't chase significance. Cultivate character. Don't look for the spotlight. Ask God to build in you something that will never go away. Cultivate character. Don't demand a miracle. Practice obedience. Don't make these deals with God. God, if you make a miracle in my life, I will follow you for the rest of mine. Practice obedience. Don't wait for perfect clarity. Take the next faithful step. God, I would follow you, but I need to know what's on the last page. Don't wait for perfect clarity. Because when you walk faithfully, God works. When you walk faithfully, God works providentially, even when you can't see it. When you are faithful in the field, he is faithful in the story. Let's pray.